I signed up for Uber Eats when it was really gaining traction back in 2021. I had just been laid off from my previous job, and finding another one quickly seemed nearly impossible. So, taking up this job was a bit of a gamble, but I hoped it would pay off. A few months in, I was enjoying it enough and it was paying me well enough to stick with it. This incident happened about a year after I started. I had fallen into the habit of waking up late and staying up late, so I didn't start working until around dinner time. By 11 p.m., I still hadn't earned enough to call it a night, so I continued accepting any order that came up. At 1 a.m., an interesting order came through. It was a grocery order from a 24-hour 7-Eleven gas station. It struck me as odd that someone would need groceries from a gas station in the middle of the night, but I accepted it anyway. I drove up to the mostly empty gas station and went into the convenience store. The only person inside was a kind old man working at the register. I picked up the bag from him and also grabbed a cup of coffee for the road before heading back to my car. I got in, situated myself, and started backing out to get on the road for the final stretch of the drive. Only moments after getting onto the main street, I noticed a car's headlights right behind me. This was very late, and there were almost no cars out, so I was certain I would have seen them before they got so close. After some thinking, I assumed they must have been at the gas station, possibly parked on the side of the building, and pulled out as soon as I did. I drove along this same road for a while, reaching the edge of town, when I suddenly felt something was wrong with my car. It was bumpier than usual, and a loud scraping sound was coming from the right side. After a minute of noticing this, it got a lot worse, to the point where I had to pull off to the side of the road before the car broke down. I parked on the shoulder with woods on either side of me, but in the mirror, I saw the headlights of that same car slowing down and pulling in right behind me. Unsure of what was going on, I decided to get out quickly and see what the problem was. I didn't know if the car behind me was going to try and help or if they had other intentions, but I knew I couldn't go anywhere until I figured it out. I ran around to the other side of my car and quickly noticed the problem. My right tire was completely flat, which was crazy since I hadn't run over anything. Usually, flat tires happen gradually, not suddenly like this. Upon closer inspection, I saw a gash on the side of the tire that didn't look natural at all. Then, I heard a door open from the car behind me. A man stepped out and waved at me. "I'm okay. Thank you," I called out, trying to get them to leave before even approaching, especially after realizing how sketchy this all was. But the man kept walking towards me. Once he got maybe 10 feet away, I could see him more clearly. He was older, with long gray and black hair and a bushy, untamed beard. He wore dirty clothes, jeans, and a hoodie covered in stains and grime. He came up next to my car and asked if he could help me out, showing a large smile. I repeated that I was okay, but he only laughed, looking at my tire and then back at me. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I lied and said I had a friend on his way to pick me up. Having rejected his help 3 times, the man's smile gradually fell into a straight face. He turned his body toward the car and very unnaturally looked around. At that moment, I felt a rush through my body, realizing I needed to get away from this man. I bolted off the road and into the tree line, hearing the man follow me into the pitch-black woods. It only lasted a few seconds before I lost him. After that, I didn't go very far, still able to see the headlights on the road, and I could make out the man's figure moving around by the cars. A few minutes later, he got in his car and left. By now, I had enough time to figure out that this was all a setup from the Uber Eats order. He had likely followed me from the gas station and slashed my tire. However, I didn't think it would be so easy to catch him. His full name and everything on the app turned out to be real. I guess he didn't think we would tie it all back to the Uber Eats order. That being said, the punishment wasn't very harsh because he didn't harm me. He only stole some things from my car, though I'm sure if I had stayed there on the road, I might not even be here to share this story. I live in a duplex in a small community. I had been there for over a year and hadn't found anything to complain about. The neighbors sharing a wall with me moved out only a month after I moved in, and nobody had bought or rented it since, so it didn't feel like a duplex at all because the other side was just empty. Anyway, this was a pretty normal night. I had just gotten off work at 10 o'clock and picked up some fast food before going home. I turned on the TV and ate my dinner on the couch. While I was eating, a quiet thud came from behind me. I turned around and looked at the wall that connected my duplex to the other side, and the thud happened again. I muted the TV and went up to the window, looking out at the driveway. There were no cars or moving trucks outside, and it didn't look like the lights were on in the other duplex either. I went back to the wall and leaned my ear against it. The sound was very muffled, but I could hear soft footsteps walking around and doors opening and closing. It was like someone was inspecting the place or looking for something. Again, that duplex unit had been empty for over a year, and I had never seen anyone enter or leave it, and it, being almost 11 p.m., only made it more unusual. After a few minutes, I realized there wasn't much else to do, so I went back to the couch and continued watching TV. I stayed up for a while, probably until 1 a.m., before getting into bed. As I tossed around and tried to fall asleep, I suddenly heard that same noise. I sat up, looking at the wall, but when the thud sounded again, it was much louder. Tiredly, I got up and walked over to the bedroom door, but before I opened it, I heard another sound, soft footsteps slowly walking across the floor downstairs. A chill instantly ran through my body. I stepped away from the door and quietly grabbed my phone from the nightstand. I turned the volume down as low as possible and called the police, whispering my address to the operator. I tried to explain my situation, but as I did, a shadow appeared under the door. I immediately stopped talking and anxiously stared at the door while the person on the other side slowly walked around. They were very cautious with each step they took, almost making no noise, but their shadow showed that they weren't going very far. They were just walking back and forth in the hallway. By now, I was sure they knew I was in the room, but I still remained quiet, hoping that somehow the police would come quickly enough to help me. A grueling few minutes went by until a sudden loud footstep rang through the hallway, followed by another and another. For some reason, whoever was out there no longer cared to be quiet, moving through the hallway quickly and beginning to open doors to the other rooms. When they came back to my room, they twisted the handle and tried a few times to force it open, but moved on without too much of a fight. They then went back downstairs and did the same before leaving the unit. Police came a while later, but I think the person who broke in had figured out that I'd likely contacted the police, and that's why they started rushing whatever they were trying to do. A few things had been stolen, but not enough to really justify breaking into a place. From their behavior, they seemed to know that I was in the house. A few weeks later, I found a small camera hidden under one of the nightstands in the spare bedroom. I took it to the police, but there was no way to trace it or see what kind of information was on it. Whether they were just trying to spy on me or had other intentions, we don't know. There's really no way for us to get an answer. It's been months since this happened, and there's been no signs of them coming back. But it's possible that I wouldn't even know if they did, at least not until it's too late. In 2019, I took a trip to northern Wisconsin and stayed in an Airbnb. It was a cabin located in the woods right by the Canada-US border, part of a park with a bunch of similar cabins that I think were owned by the same person. I wasn't far from town or anything. It was only 10 minutes from the nearest store, but the immediate area around the cabin was very secluded. Each place had its own trail leading just to their cabin. The first couple of days, I mostly stayed by myself, either inside or walking on the trails. After that, though, I got kind of bored and thought I'd hang out at the park center with some of the others staying in the cabins. The park center was basically just an area with some charcoal grills, fire pits, and benches. Every time I passed it, there were groups of people standing around and having a good time, so I decided to go check it out. I showed up around 5 and right away met a couple of really cool guys. We shared some beers and sat by the fire pit, just sharing some casual campfire talk. It was just us for a while, but around sundown another guy showed up. Of course, we offered him some drinks and let him join us by the fire, but I immediately felt something was off about this guy. He wasn't talking much and didn't look like he was enjoying himself. I mean, this park was for people vacationing at the cabins, so it was strange that he looked so tired and unhappy. It kind of killed the mood for the next couple of hours, but I don't think any of us wanted to tell him to leave. Eventually, one of the guys left and then the other, leaving just me and him. I stood up, put out the fire, and said I was going to head back for the night, but that it was nice meeting him. The guy stayed sitting, though, and just looked at me with a tired stare. I turned around and walked away, not saying anything else. While I started walking down the trail, I looked back a few times, catching the man still looking at me. He'd look away as soon as I saw him, acting like he wasn't watching me. Luckily, the trail to my cabin was well lit by some outdoor lamps, and from what I could see, I don't think he followed me. I made it back inside, took a quick shower, and then sat in the living room for 15 minutes before going to bed. After the few beers from earlier, I passed out right away. I can't recall what time it was that I woke up because it was all kind of a blur at first, but I remember being confused and rolling over to look at the clock when I saw a man standing in the open doorway to the bedroom. I could only see his figure as there was only the moonlight coming through the window. I was absolutely horrified and frozen, staring back at this man. But then he spoke and I recognized his voice as the guy from the fire pit. "I need to stay here," he said in a broken and harsh voice. I didn't know what he meant, and I tried to ask but only stuttered out a few syllables before he repeated himself. "I need to stay here." He spoke even more harshly this time, so I quickly replied, saying okay, but still had no clue what was going on or what he even meant. At this point, I thought he was psycho or something, which also meant he was unpredictable. I slowly got up from my bed, careful not to make any sudden moves. Now, with my eyes adjusting and being face to face, I could see him more clearly. His tired look from earlier was accentuated, and sweat was dripping from his face. We looked each other in the eyes for a few moments, then he stepped back into the hallway. He stood with his back against the wall as if giving me space to leave, but I noticed his left hand was stiffly held to his side like he was keeping something out of my sight. After a few more moments, I quickly walked past him, and as I got around the corner, I saw him still standing in the hallway, just watching me leave. Once I was outside, I ran down the trail and by chance, a group was at the park center having drinks by a fire pit. I got them to call 911 for me, and a few minutes later, they came and searched the cabin, finding the man standing in the hallway still and holding a knife in his left hand. When they got him down to the station, they questioned him, but his answers didn't make sense, and the man seemed really unstable, so it was all counted under insanity. I don't even know what else to really say about what happened, but I'm just thankful that, in that moment, something told the man to let me go before anything else happened.